This is the point where we can make our models look like miniature replicas of real machines, or just some overcomplicated toys that fall apart just by looking them in the wrong way. Let's get started with a nice coat of black surface primer. Primer will help with adhesion, while the black color will come handy for the textures. And let's start applying those textures on the lower wing. For this I'm using the camouflage color, spraying it in such a way that creates various shapes inside the panels, around the panel lines, between the ribs, and so on. I play with the opacity, leaving the paint on some places fairly transparent, while on others the color gets its full strength. After this layer is done, we can move on to the initial blending layer. I use the same color but a lot thinner so I can better control the opacity. Here we can also add some variation by applying the blending layer in model fashion. As mentioned in the previous episode, I did not attach the underwing scoops, so I can paint the interior portion first. After the paint, I can attach the photo etch radiator grills and then glue the scoop in place. Fortunately, there were no fitment issues here. The opacity of the final blend layer is up to anyone's taste, so you can leave a lot of texture visible or leave just a hint of it. Just remember to let each pass dry sufficiently, because sometimes the paint opacity changes as it dries, and you may end up completely covering the effect. Another effect that I will apply now is the dust accumulation on the underside of the airplane. I have a dedicated tutorial which you can find in the description, so I will not go into too much details. But in essence, I apply light and low opacity dust color layers in a broad area, and then bring the opacity up as I cover smaller and smaller areas near the places where most dust would accumulate. I also change the color to a more brownish tone for near and in the panel lines. Also, I added a black filter on the areas where some heat staining might occur, like behind the cooler outlets and the shell ejection ports. On the top of the wing, I'm starting with some silver followed by hairspray, so we can do some bare metal chipping later on. Another thing to add is the tail bend, which I painted in the same way as I painted the underside. After I was done painting, I masked the bend, and now we can do the camouflage. To keep track of the camouflage pattern, I outlined the demarcation lines using regular lead pencil, which by the way works very well on the primer. Then I started building up the texture layer. It helps a lot when you have a kit like this one, where you have not only great recessed panel lines, but also the kit is fully riveted and the surface detail is exceptional, and we have to commend Edward for putting this much effort. The blending layer here needs more delicate approach because I want to preserve the black base coat for the green camouflage spots. So very carefully and working in small sections, I applied layer after layer of color, building the opacity to the point where I was happy with the result. After I was done with the ocean grey spots, I had to mask them off. To do that, I made my own self-adhesive camo pattern masks. If you want to learn more about that, I'll put a link to my tutorial in the description of this video. On some places where I was not able to attach the masks, I used some blue tack instead. Since the masks are slightly raised above the surface of the model, it is important to maintain a constant angle in relation to the edge of the mask. If you want harder demarcation line, you'll need to spray directly from above the mask. The more you reduce the angle, the more paint gets under the mask, resulting in a softer edge. So whichever you choose, you have to stick with it. The dark green color was not extremely suitable for the textures, and a lighter shade would have been much better. But still, with some careful blending, the tonal variation was not totally lost. After all this airbrushing comes the most satisfying moment, removing the masks. Now let's do the hairspray chipping. This is one more technique that I have covered in a detailed tutorial which you can find in the description. In short, what we do is to reactivate the hairspray with some water and then chip away the softened paint using a toothpick, a brush or something similar. This is a very powerful effect, and if overdone, it can look out of proportion. so better check your references to see the paint wear patterns on the aircraft you are building. After the chipping was done, I masked around the areas on the leading edge that need to be painted in yellow. I did not do anything special here, just sprayed the yellow paint. You know, one of those moments where you spend 20 minutes masking and 2 minutes painting. Next come a few layers of gloss varnish before we can apply the decals. For some reason this is a controversial topic, but for me this is the way to do it. The decals that come in the kit are pretty good in my opinion. They are rather thin, the carrier film is trimmed nice and close to the graphics, and the decals conform to the surface even without softening solution. Of course, I help them conform even better with some Agama strong solution. All nice and good, but it is a bit too nice compared to the rest of the model. So, with some fading, using highly diluted off-white paint, I am trying to tone down the vibrant colors of the decals and give them some more realistic and weathered appearance. Using the same color I did some fading on other areas where it seemed appropriate. Panel line washes seem to be a standard procedure when it comes to weathering. Here I used dark grey wash for the blue camo spots, applying the wash in a more precise fashion. After the wash is dry, a quick wipe along the airflow will not only remove the excess wash, but will also create very subtle streaking effect. On the green camouflage spots, I used dark green wash. Again, trying to be precise in the application so that the wash does not spill onto the blue spots. And again, after the wash is dry, we can remove the excess using makeup applicator, paper towel, or anything that will remove the wash but will not damage the surface. And since on the belly we have only one color, I applied the medium grey wash using larger brush and covering the entire surface. In my recent builds I am kinda going away from the panel line washes, but this is a topic for another video. For the next weathering step we will need a solid flat coat, that's why here I use lacquer based matte varnish. Watercolor pencils are somewhat recent addition to the modeler's toolbox, but it is a good one because watercolor pencils allow to create, among other things, very fine non-metallic chipping effect, much easier than it would be using a brush. At least for me it is near impossible to do such fine chips. Here I am putting emphasis on the panels that are more often removed by the ground crew, and also I am outlining the rivet lines because the rivets were not deep enough to hold the panel line wash. Another advantage of the pencils is the vast selection of colors available. And since some manufacturers of scale modeling products got in this game, we have a choice of colors geared towards our needs. Another thing to note here is that any following varnish needs to be acrylic and very carefully applied. My experience shows that hotter stuff will melt the pigment of the pencils. Now let's deal with the grimy and dirty stuff on the airplane. I'm going to kick things off with some Starship Field oil paint around the fuel filler cap, the engine nacelle joints, and behind the exhaust ducts for instance. I apply small quantities of the paint in the area, then I use the brush to blend the paint until I get the effect I am after. Another very cool use is to add leaks that get dragged by the airflow. Like streaking, but with more context, I guess. Now it's time to do some exhaust staining around the guns and obviously around the exhaust ducts. I'm using highly diluted flat black paint so I can build the color gradually. There are two important things to note here. First is to examine the real aircraft and replicate the exhaust stain patterns because otherwise it will look a bit strange, like a lot strange. Other thing is not to overdo it, which is easier said than done actually. Here I can also offer a in-depth tutorial and again the link for it will be in the description. Well, it is time to put together the few remaining parts and code is done. I can recommend this kit, but probably in its weekend edition version. Great surface detail, awesome selection of camo schemes out of the box, iconic airplane, what more to ask? Maybe a larger scale, which I think Edward offers, however I am not sure if it is the same thing. If you want to see a gallery of the finished model, click on the upper end screen thumbnail. Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy modeling fellas!